The Arizona Territory in 1884 was a land of stark contrasts, breathtaking beauty, marred by brutal prejudice, where the color of one's skin often determined not just social standing, but survival itself. My name is Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, and at 23, I had already learned that love recognizes no boundaries, even when society demands that it should. I had come to the small frontier town of Mesa Verde 2 years earlier as a schoolteacher, one of the few respectable professions available to an unmarried woman of my education and background. My father, a professor of literature at Harvard, had died of consumption, leaving me with little inheritance but a fine education and an independent spirit that often put me at odds with the expectations of proper society. Mesa Verde was a rough settlement of perhaps 300 souls, built around a trading post and sustained by the nearby copper mine. The town consisted of a main street lined with wooden buildings that seemed to lean against each other for support, a small church that doubled as the schoolhouse, and enough saloons to serve the miners and cowboys who made up the majority of the population. It was in this unlikely place that I first encountered Aiyana, whose name meant eternal blossom in his native Apache tongue. He was unlike any man I had ever met, tall and lean, with intelligent dark eyes that seemed to see straight through to one's soul, and a quiet dignity that commanded respect even from those who despised his heritage. Aiyana worked as a scout and translator for the territorial government, one of the few Apache men trusted by the white authorities to help negotiate between the increasingly tense worlds of the settlers and the native tribes. His English was flawless, learned during his years at the Carlisle Indian Industrial School in Pennsylvania, where he had been sent as a child as part of the government's assimilation program. Our first meeting occurred on a Tuesday morning in September when he came to the schoolhouse to deliver a message from the territorial governor about increased Apache raids in the area. I was teaching a lesson on American history to my 15 students when he appeared in the doorway, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every person in the room. "Miss Whitmore," he said, his voice carrying a slight accent that made even my plain name sound musical, "I have a message from Governor Safford regarding the recent troubles." The children stared openly at him, some with curiosity, others with the fear and suspicion they had learned from their parents. I noticed how he held himself with perfect posture, his clothes a white shirt, dark pants, and a leather vest clean and well-maintained, despite the dusty journey from the territorial capital. "Thank you, Mr. I said, rising from my desk. He replied simply. "Most white people find it easier to call me by my Christian name, David, but I prefer my given name." "Then Aiyana it shall be," I said, accepting the sealed envelope from his hands. Our fingers brushed briefly during the exchange, and I felt an unexpected jolt of electricity at the contact. After he left, the children immediately began chattering about the Indian man who had visited their classroom. Their comments ranged from innocent curiosity to parroting the prejudiced opinions they had heard at home. "My PA says you can't trust any of them," declared Tommy Morrison, the 10-year-old son of the mine foreman. "Says they're all savages who'd scalp you soon as look at you." "That's enough, Tommy," I said firmly. "Mr. Aiyana is a gentleman who serves our territorial government. We will speak of him with respect, just as we would any other visitor to our classroom." But even as I defended him to my students, I found myself thinking about Aiyana long after the school day ended. There had been something in his depth of intelligence and sadness that spoke of experiences far beyond his apparent years. I found myself wondering about his story, about the boy who had been taken from his family and sent to a distant school to have his culture stripped away, only to return as a man caught between two worlds. Our second meeting came 3 weeks later, when I encountered him at Morrison's general store while purchasing supplies for the school. He was examining a selection of books, a sight that seemed to surprise the store owner, who kept glancing nervously between us. "Miss Whitmore," said, nodding politely when he noticed me. "Mr. Aiyana," I replied, "I see you're a reader." Books were one of the few comforts available at Carlisle, he said, holding up a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. "I find that words have the power to transport us beyond the limitations of our circumstances." "A beautiful sentiment," I said, genuinely impressed. "Are you familiar with Whitman? I find his celebration of the American spirit quite moving." "I contain multitudes," he quoted, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Yes, I appreciate his understanding that a person can be many things at once, even when society insists we must choose only one identity." Our conversation was interrupted by the arrival of several townspeople, including Mayor Hutchins and his wife, who stared openly at us with expressions of shock and disapproval. The temperature in the store seemed to drop several degrees as they took in the sight of the town schoolteacher engaged in literary discussion with an Apache man. "Miss Whitmore," Mayor Hutchins said stiffly, "I trust you're finding everything you need for the school." "Yes, thank you, Mayor Hutchins," I replied, refusing to be intimidated by his obvious displeasure. "Mr. David," the mayor continued, using the Christian name despite Aiyana's clear preference, "I believe you have business elsewhere." "Actually," Aiyana said calmly, "I was just purchasing this book." "Mr. Morrison, how much for the Shakespeare?" The store owner, clearly uncomfortable with the tension in the air, quickly completed the transaction. As Aiyana prepared to leave, he turned back to me. Miss Whitmore, if you're interested in discussing literature further, I often read by the creek on Sunday afternoons, but spot about a mile north of town, near the old cottonwood grove." With that, he left, leaving me to face the disapproving stares of my fellow townspeople. Mrs. Hutchins leaned close to her husband, and whispered something that made his face redden with anger. "Miss Whitmore," the mayor said after the other customers had left, "I hope you understand the delicate nature of your position in this community. As our school teacher, you're expected to maintain certain standards of behavior." "I'm not sure I understand your meaning, Mayor Hutchins," I said, though I understood perfectly. "I think you do," he replied. "This is a small town, Miss Whitmore. People talk. It would be unfortunate if there were any misunderstandings about your character or your commitment to the values we hold dear in Mesa Verde." The threat was clear, though couched in polite language. I was being warned away from any further contact with Aiyana, not because of anything he had done wrong, but simply because of who he was. That night, I lay awake thinking about the encounter. I had come to the Arizona Territory seeking independence and the opportunity to make a difference through education. But I was discovering that even here, on the frontier where I had hoped to find more freedom, the same prejudices and narrow-mindedness that had constrained me in Boston were alive and, well, despite the mayor's warning, or perhaps because of it, I found myself at the Cottonwood Grove the following Sunday afternoon. Aiyana was there, as he had said he would be, sitting beside the creek with a book in his hands. He looked up as I approached, and I saw surprise and pleasure in his dark eyes. "I wasn't certain you would come," he said, rising to greet me. "Neither was I admitted, "but I've never been one to let others dictate my choice of friends." "Friends," he repeated, as if testing the word. "It's been a long time since I've had a friend, Miss Whitmore. Most white people see only what they expect to see when they look at me. And what do they expect to see? A savage," he said simply. "Someone to be feared or pitied, but never understood as a complete person with thoughts, feelings, and dreams of his own." We spent that afternoon talking about books, about our different experiences of education, about the beauty of the Arizona landscape and the tragedy of the conflicts that were tearing the territory apart. I learned that Aiyana had been born into the Chiricahua Apache tribe, that his father had been a respected warrior, and his mother, a woman known for her wisdom and healing abilities. "They took me when I was 7, he told me, his voice distant with memory, said they were going to kill the Indian and save the man. At Carlisle, we were forbidden to speak our language, practice our customs, or even use our real names. They cut our hair, dressed us in uniforms, and tried to make us forget everything we had ever been." "But you didn't forget," I observed. "No," he said, a note of quiet pride in his voice. "I learned their ways, but I kept my own heart. When I returned, I found I no longer fully belonged to either world. Too Indian for white society, too white for my own people. I exist in the space between, trying to build bridges where others see only chasms." As the weeks passed, our Sunday afternoon meetings became a cherished routine. We discussed philosophy and poetry, shared stories of our childhoods, and gradually opened our hearts to each other in ways that transcended the racial barriers that society insisted must divide us. It was during our 6th meeting that I realized I had fallen in love with him. We were discussing Thoreau's Walden, and Aiyana was explaining how the author's philosophy of simple living resonated with traditional Apache values, when he looked at me with such intensity that my breath caught in my throat. "Sarah," he said, using my first name for the first time, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" I asked, though my heart was already racing with anticipation. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it's impossible. I know it can only bring trouble for both of us. But I can't continue to pretend that what I feel for you is mere friendship." "Aiyana," I whispered, reaching out to touch his face. "I love you too. I've loved you for weeks, but I was afraid to say it, afraid of what it might mean." He caught my hand in his and pressed it against his cheek. "It means we're about to face a storm that will test everything we believe about love and courage." He was right, of course. Our love was forbidden by every law and custom of the society we lived in. But as we sat beside that creek, holding each other for the first time, I knew that I would rather face any storm with Aiyana than live safely without him. The storm began the very next day, when Mrs. Patterson, the banker's wife, claimed to have seen us embracing by the creek. By Tuesday morning, the entire town was buzzing with scandal. I arrived at the schoolhouse to find a group of parents waiting for me, their faces grim with disapproval. "Miss Whitmore," said Mr. Garrett, whose daughter Mary was one of my best students, "we need to discuss your associations." "I'm not sure what you mean, Mr. Garrett," I said, though my heart was sinking. "Don't play innocent with us," snapped Mrs. Morrison, Tommy's mother. "The whole town knows you've been carrying on with that Apache. It's disgraceful. What kind of example are you setting for our children?" "I'm setting an example of treating all people with dignity and respect," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Dignity and respect." Mrs. Morrison's voice rose to a shriek. "You're consorting with a savage. My Tommy came home asking why his teacher was friends with an Indian. What am I supposed to tell him?" "You could tell him that character matters, more than the color of one's skin," I suggested. The group erupted in angry murmurs. Mr. Garrett held up his hand for silence. Miss Whitmore, we've discussed this situation, and we've reached a decision. Either you end this relationship immediately and publicly apologize for your inappropriate behavior, or we'll be forced to find a new teacher for our children. I looked at their faces, people I had worked with, whose children I had taught and cared for, and saw nothing but prejudice and hatred. In that moment, I realized that no matter what I chose, I would never again be able to respect myself if I bowed to their bigotry. Then you'll need to find a new teacher, I said quietly, because I will not apologize for loving a good man, regardless of his heritage. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Several parents began shouting at once, calling me names that no lady should ever have to hear. Through it all, I stood my ground, even as my heart broke for the children who would suffer because of their parents' hatred. That evening, as I packed my few belongings, I wondered what would become of me. I had no family to return to, no other job prospects, and very little money. But I also knew that I had made the only choice I could live with. It was then that I heard a soft knock at my door. I opened it to find Aiyana standing on my doorstep, his face grave with concern. I heard what happened, he said. Sarah, I'm so sorry. This is my fault. No, I said firmly, stepping aside to let him in. This is the fault of small-minded people who can't see past their own prejudices. You have nothing to apologize for, but you've lost everything because of me, he said, his voice heavy with guilt. I've lost a job, I corrected, but I've kept my integrity and my love for you. That seems like a fair trade to me. He pulled me into his arms then, and we held each other as the sun set over the Arizona desert, both of us knowing that our troubles were far from over. What challenges will Sarah and Aiyana face as their forbidden love becomes public knowledge? How will the townspeople react to their defiance of social conventions? Will their love be strong enough to survive the storm that's coming? Don't miss the next chapter to see how far prejudice will go to destroy true love. The news of my dismissal from the school spread through Mesa Verde like wildfire across dry grass. By the next morning, I could feel the weight of hostile stares following me as I walked to Morrison's general store to purchase supplies for my departure. The whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I approached, the way people crossed the street to avoid passing near MIT was as if I had become a pariah overnight. But it was the children who broke my heart the most. Little Mary Garrett, who had been reading at a level far beyond her years, ran to me when she saw me on the street. Miss Whitmore, she called out, her face bright with innocent joy. Are you really not going to be our teacher anymore? Before I could answer, her mother appeared and roughly grabbed the child's arm. Mary, get away from her this instant. But Mama, she's Miss Whitmore. She's no one you need to concern yourself with anymore, Mrs. Garrett said coldly, dragging her confused daughter away. Over her shoulder, she hissed at me. You should be ashamed of yourself, corrupting innocent children with your perverted ideas. I stood there on the dusty street, watching them disappear around the corner, and felt tears sting my eyes. These were children I had taught to read, whose scraped knees I had bandaged, whose dreams I had encouraged. Now they were being taught that love itself could be shameful if it crossed the arbitrary lines drawn by society. That afternoon, as I continued, packing my belongings, another knock came at my door. This time it was Dr. Samuel Hayes, one of the few people in town who had always treated me with genuine respect. Miss Whitmore, he said, removing his hat as he entered my small room above the boarding house. I came to see if there was anything I could do to help. That's very kind of you, Dr. Hayes, but I'm afraid the situation is quite beyond help. Is it? He asked, settling into the room's single chair. Sarah May? I call you Sarah. I've been practicing medicine for 30 years, and I've learned to see past the surface of things. I've watched you with those children, seen the care and dedication you bring to your work, and I've observed Mr. Aiyana during his visits to town. He's an educated, honorable man who has done nothing but serve this community faithfully. I looked at him in surprise. You don't disapprove of that, Dr. Hayes sighed deeply. My dear, I've seen too much of life to waste time on the prejudices that consume smaller minds. During the war, I treated wounded soldiers of every color and creed, and I learned that pain and love and hope look the same regardless of the skin they wear. What I see between you and Aiyana is genuine affection between two intelligent people. The tragedy is that this community is too blind to recognize the gift they're throwing away. His words brought fresh tears to my eyes. Thank you for saying that, Dr. Hayes. You have no idea how much it means to hear someone speak with sanity and compassion. Where will you go? He asked, gently. I don't know, I admitted. I have a little money saved, enough to get to Tucson. Perhaps I might find work there as a governess or seamstress. What about Aiyana? Will he go with you? The question hung in the air between us. Aiyana and I had spoken of many things, but we had not yet discussed what our future might hold. How could we, a white woman and an Apache man traveling together, would face hostility everywhere they went? Even if we could find a place that would tolerate our presence, what kind of life could we build? I don't know, I said again, the words heavy with uncertainty. Dr. Hayes leaned forward. Sarah, I want you to know that if you decide to stay and fight this, you won't be entirely alone. There are a few of us in this town who believe in justice over prejudice. Not many, I'll grant you, but perhaps enough to make a difference. Before I could respond, The sound of shouting from the street below drew us both to the window. What I saw there made my blood run cold. A crowd of perhaps 20 men had gathered in front of the boarding house, and at their head stood Mayor Hutchins, his face red with anger. Several of the men carried torches despite the daylight hour, and their voices carried the ugly edge of mob violence. "Where is she?" someone shouted. "Where's the Indian lover? Bring her out," called another voice. "Let her explain herself to decent folk." Dr. Hayes gripped my arm. "Stay away from the window," he said urgently. "I'll go down and try to disperse them." But before he could move, another voice cut through the crowd, calm, strong, and unmistakably. "Aiyana's gentlemen," he said, and I could see him now, standing at the edge of the crowd with his hands visible and empty. "I understand you're upset. If you have grievances with me, I'm here to address them." "Grievances?" Mayor Hutchins stepped forward, his voice dripping with contempt. "You've corrupted one of our women, turned her against her own kind. That's more than a grievance, that's an abomination." "Miss Whitmore is a grown woman capable of making her own choices," Aiyana replied evenly. "I have treated her with nothing but respect and honor." Respect. The crowd erupted in angry laughter. What would a savage know about respect? I couldn't stand it anymore. Despite Dr. Hayes' protests, I opened the window and leaned out. "Stop it," I called down to them. "If you have something to say to me, say it, but don't you dare speak to him that way." The crowd turned their faces up toward me, and I saw hatred there that took my breath away. These were people I had lived among for 2 years, whose children I had taught, whose illnesses Dr. Hayes had treated. Now they looked at me as if I were something less than human. "There she is," someone shouted. "The traitor. You've disgraced every decent white woman in this territory," called Mrs. Morrison. "How can you stand there and defend that, that animal? Aiyana is more of a gentleman than any man in this crowd." I shot back, my anger overcoming my fear. "He has more education, more honor, and more compassion than all of you combined." The crowd surged forward, but Aiyana stepped between them and the building. "That's enough," he said, his voice carrying an authority that made several men hesitate. "You want to blame someone for your anger? Blame me, but leave Miss Whitmore alone." "Oh, we'll deal with you. Don't worry," snarled Jake Morrison, Tommy's father. "We know how to handle your kind." "My kind?" Aiyana's voice remained calm, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "You mean educated men who serve their community faithfully? Men who have never broken a law or harmed a soul?" "We mean savages who don't know their place," Morrison replied, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. It was then that Dr. Hayes appeared at the front door of the boarding house, his medical bag in one hand and a shotgun in the other. "That's quite enough," he said firmly. "I won't have violence on my street, and I won't stand by while good people are threatened by a mob." "Stay out of this, Doc," Mayor Hutchins warned. "This doesn't concern you. It concerns me when my neighbors abandon decency and threaten innocent people," Dr. Hayes replied. "Now I suggest you all go home before someone does something they'll regret." For a moment, the situation balanced on a knife's edge. Then Sheriff Coleman arrived, pushing through the crowd with his deputy at his side. "What's all this about?" he demanded, though his tone suggested he already knew. "We want justice, Sheriff," Mayor Hutchins said. "This woman has been consorting with an Apache, corrupting our children with her perverted ideas about race mixing." Sheriff Coleman looked up at me, then at Aiyana, then back at the crowd. I could see him calculating, weighing his options. "Well," he said finally, "I don't see any laws being broken here. A woman has a right to choose her own company, and last I checked, Mr. Aiyana here works for the territorial government." "You're not going to do anything?" Morrison demanded. "About what? Two people talking to each other? No, Jake, I'm not. But I am going to do something about this mob. You all need to disperse before I start arresting people for disturbing the peace." Grumbling and muttering threats, the crowd began to break up. But I could see in their faces that this was far from over. As they walked away, several men made gestures toward Aiyana that left no doubt about their intentions. After the street cleared, Aiyana and Dr. Hayes came up to my room. Aiyana's face was grim, and I could see the weight of responsibility in his eyes. "Sarah," he said without preamble, "you have to leave. Tonight, it's not safe for you here anymore." "I'm not leaving without you," I said firmly. "You have to," he insisted. "Don't you see? As long as you're here, you're in danger. And as long as I'm here, I'm putting you in more danger. Then we'll leave together." Aiyana shook his head. "Where could we go? What kind of life could we have? Everywhere we went, we'd face the same hatred, the same threats." "I don't care," I said, taking his hands in mine. "I'd rather face hatred with you than safety without you." Dr. Hayes cleared his throat. "If I may," he said gently, "there might be another option." We both turned to him hopefully. "I have a colleague in California, Dr. Marcus Webb. He runs a clinic in a small town near San Francisco, a place that's grown up around the railroad. It's more cosmopolitan than Mesa Verde, more accepting of differences. He's been looking for a nurse. And Sarah, your education would qualify you for the position." "What about Aiyana?" I asked. "The railroad is always hiring men who can speak." multiple languages, and deal with diverse populations. Dr. Hayes continued. A man with Aiyana's education and experience would be valuable to them. It was a lifeline, but it meant leaving everything familiar behind and starting over in a place where we knew no one. It's a chance, Aiyana said quietly. But Sarah, you need to understand what you'd be giving up. If you come with me, you'll never be able to return to the life you knew. You'll be cut off from your own people forever. I looked at this man I loved, saw the pain in his eyes as he tried to give me a way out, and knew that my choice had been made long ago. Aiyana, I said softly, you are my people now. Wherever you go, that's where I belong. The next morning, before dawn, we left Mesa Verde forever. Dr. Hayes had arranged for a wagon to take us to the railroad station in Phoenix, and from there we would travel to California and whatever future awaited us as we rode through the desert. In the pre-dawn darkness, I looked back once at the town that had been my home. I felt sadness for the children I was leaving behind, for the narrow-mindedness that would continue to poison their lives. But I felt no regret for my choice. Are you afraid? Aiyana asked as the sun began to rise over the mountains. Yes, I admitted, but not of the future. I'm afraid of what we're leaving behind, the hatred, the violence, the way people can turn love into something shameful. And what gives you hope? I smiled and took his hand. You do. The fact that in all this ugliness, we found something beautiful. The fact that love can exist even when the whole world seems set against it. As our wagon rolled toward the rising sun, I knew that we faced an uncertain future, but we faced it together, and that made all the difference. Will Sarah and Aiyana find acceptance in California, or will they face new challenges in their quest for a life together? How will their love survive the trials ahead? Don't miss the final chapter to see how true love can triumph over even the deepest prejudice. The train journey to California took 3 days, and every mile carried us further from the world we had known and closer to an uncertain future. Aiyana and I traveled as brother and sister, a deception that sat uneasily with both of us, but one that was necessary for our safety. Even so, I could feel the suspicious glances of other passengers. The way conversations stopped when we passed through the dining car together. On the second day, as we crossed into California, a well-dressed woman approached me while Aiyana was outside on the platform during a station stop. Excuse me, dear, she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. But I couldn't help noticing you're traveling with that ... gentleman. Are you quite certain it's safe? I mean, one hears such stories about their kind. Their kind? I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. Well, you know, she said, lowering her voice conspiratorially, the Indians, they're not like us, dear. They have different ... appetites, different moral standards. I felt my temper rising, but I forced myself to remain calm. Madam, I can assure you that my traveling companion is a perfect gentleman with impeccable moral standards. Perhaps you should examine your own prejudices before questioning his character. The woman's face flushed red. Well, I never, the very idea that a decent white woman would defend such creatures. The only creature I see here is the one who judges people by the color of their skin rather than the content of their character. I replied evenly. She huffed away in indignation, but her words stayed with me. If we faced such attitudes even among strangers on a train, what would we encounter when we tried to build a life together? When Aiyana returned, he immediately noticed my distress. What happened? He asked quietly. I told him about the encounter, and I saw the familiar shadow of pain cross his features. Sarah, he said, it's not too late to change your mind. When we reach San Francisco, you could continue on alone. Dr. Hayes' colleague would still hire you, and you could build a respectable life without the burden of stop. I interrupted firmly. Don't you dare call yourself a burden. We've been through this, Aiyana. I chose you, and I choose you again every day. No amount of ignorant prejudice is going to change that. He took my hand, careful to keep the gesture hidden from other passengers. I love you for your courage, but I fear what it might cost you, and I love you for your concern. But you need to trust me to make my own choices about what I'm willing to sacrifice for love. San Francisco in 1884 was a city of contrasts, elegant mansions on Nob Hill, overlooking crowded tenements in Chinatown, gleaming new buildings rising, beside structures that still bore scars from the great earthquake of 1868. It was a place where fortunes were made and lost overnight, where people from all over the world came seeking opportunity and reinvention. Dr. Marcus Webb met us at the train station, a kindly man in his 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles. He had been expecting only me, and I saw his surprise when Aiyana stepped off the train beside me. Dr. Webb, I said, extending my hand, I'm Sarah Whitmore. Thank you so much for this opportunity. Miss Whitmore, he replied, shaking my hand warmly. Dr. Hayes spoke very highly of your qualifications. And this is Aiyana, I said, my heart pounding as I prepared to reveal our relationship. He's my fiancé. Dr. Webb's eyebrows rose slightly, but his expression remained neutral. I see. Dr. Hayes didn't mention, well, no matter. Mr. Aiyana, is it? What's your profession? I've worked as a translator and scout for the territorial government, Aiyana replied carefully. I speak several languages and have experience in negotiations and communications. Interesting, Dr. Webb mused. The railroad is always looking for men with those skills, especially with the Chinese workers. Many of them speak little English, and there are often misunderstandings. As we rode through the city in Dr. Webb's carriage, he explained the situation at his clinic. I serve a diverse population, he said. Chinese immigrants, Mexican families, Irish dock workers, former slaves who came west after the war, people who often can't afford the fancy doctors on Nob Hill. It's challenging work, but rewarding. It sounds perfect, I said, and I meant it. After the narrow-mindedness of Mesa Verde, the idea of working with people from different backgrounds was appealing. There is one thing I should mention, Dr. Webb continued, glancing meaningfully at Aiyana and me. San Francisco is more tolerant than many places, but it's not without its prejudices. You may face some challenges. We're prepared for that, I said, though I wondered if we truly were. The clinic was located in a modest building on the edge of Chinatown, with living quarters above for Dr. Webb and his staff. He showed me to a small but comfortable room that would be mine, and I was relieved to see that Aiyana would be housed in a similar room just down the hall. Now then, Dr. Webb said as we settled in his office for tea, let's discuss the practical matters. Miss Whitmore, your duties will include assisting with patients, maintaining medical records, and helping with basic treatments. The pay is modest but fair, and you'll have room and board provided. And Mr. Aiyana, he continued, I've already sent word to my contact at the railroad. They're interested in meeting with you tomorrow. If all goes well, you could start within the week. That evening, as Aiyana and I walked through the streets of San Francisco, I marveled at the diversity around us. Chinese merchants called out their wares in accented English. Mexican musicians played on street corners, and people of every color and nationality moved through the crowds with apparent ease. It's different here, Aiyana observed. Not perfect, but different. Do you think we can be happy here? I asked. He stopped walking and turned to face me. Sarah, I think we can be happy anywhere, as long as we're together. But I also think this place might give us something we've never had before, the chance to simply be ourselves without constantly fighting for the right to exist. Our first weeks in San Francisco were a whirlwind of new experiences. I threw myself into my work at the clinic, learning to treat everything from knife wounds to childhood fevers to the mysterious ailments that seemed to plague the Chinese workers. Dr. Webb was an excellent teacher, patient and thorough, and I found myself growing more confident in my abilities each day. Aiyana's job with the railroad proved to be exactly what he needed. His linguistic skills and cultural sensitivity made him invaluable in resolving conflicts between workers from different backgrounds. More importantly, his supervisors judged him by his results rather than his heritage. But it was in the evenings, when we could finally be ourselves, that we truly began to build our life together. We would walk through Golden Gate Park, attend concerts at the Opera House, and spend hours talking about our dreams for the future. It was during one of these evening walks, about 2 months after our arrival, that Aiyana surprised me with a proposal that was both romantic and practical. Sarah, he said, as we stood watching the sunset over the Pacific Ocean, I know we've been living as if we're engaged, but I want to make it real. Will you marry me? Yes, I said without hesitation, but you know it won't be legal, don't you? California law forbids marriage between whites and Indians. I know, he said, pulling me into his arms, but there are other ways to make a commitment. Dr. Webb has a friend who's a Unitarian minister. He's willing to perform a ceremony that would be recognized by God, if not by the state. Then that's all that matters, I said, standing on my toes to kiss him. Our wedding took place on a hillside overlooking the bay, with Dr. Webb and a few friends from the clinic as witnesses. I wore a simple blue dress that I had sewn myself, and Aiyana wore a new suit that he had purchased with his first railroad paycheck. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, with vows that we had written ourselves. I promise, I said, looking into Aiyana's eyes, to love you not despite our differences, but because of them, to stand with you against whatever challenges we face, and to build a life that honors both of our heritages. I promise, Aiyana replied, to protect and cherish you, to be worthy of the sacrifice you've made for our love, and to prove every day that love is stronger than hatred. As the minister pronounced us husband and wife in the eyes of God, I felt a peace that I had never known before. We might not be legally married, but our commitment was real and binding in every way that mattered. Our happiness, however, was not without its challenges. There were still those in San Francisco who disapproved of our relationship, and we faced occasional harassment and discrimination. Some patients at the clinic refused to be treated by me once they learned of my marriage, and Aiyana sometimes encountered hostility from workers who resented taking orders from an Indian. But for every person who showed us hatred, there seemed to be two who showed us kindness. Mrs. Chen, the elderly Chinese woman who ran the herb shop next to the clinic, became like a grandmother to us, teaching me traditional remedies and treating Aiyana with the respect due to an educated man. Father O'Malley, the Irish priest who ministered to the dock workers, often stopped by the clinic to chat and never once questioned our right to be together. It was Dr. Webb, however, who provided the most support and wisdom during our adjustment to married life. You know, he said one evening, as the three of us shared dinner, I've been practicing medicine for over 20 years. and I've learned that the human heart doesn't recognize the artificial boundaries that society tries to impose. Love is love, regardless of the color of the skin that contains it. Not everyone sees it that way, I observed. No, he agreed, but more people do than you might think. The loudest voices are often the most ignorant ones. The quiet majority of the people who judge others by their actions rather than their appearance there, on your side, even if they don't always speak up. As if to prove his point, we began to notice small gestures of acceptance and support from unexpected sources. The Italian baker, who always gave us an extra roll with our weekly bread order. The German clockmaker who repaired Aiyana's pocket, watch for free. The Mexican seamstress who altered my dresses and always complimented us on how happy we looked together. 6 months after our wedding, I discovered I was pregnant. The news filled us both with joy and terror in equal measure. Joy because we would finally have the family we both longed for, terror because we knew our child would face even greater challenges than we had. What kind of world are we bringing? A child into? I asked Aiyana one night as we lay in bed, my hand resting on my still flat stomach. A world that's changing, he replied, covering my hand with his. Slowly, sometimes painfully, but changing nonetheless. Our child will grow up in a different world than the one we knew, hopefully a better one. And if it's not better, then we'll teach our child to be strong, to be proud of who they are, and to never let anyone else's ignorance define their worth. Our daughter was born on a crisp October morning in 1885, with Dr. Webb attending the birth, and Mrs. Chen providing traditional Chinese herbs to ease my labor. We named her Hope, a name that reflected our faith in the future and our belief that love could overcome any obstacle. Hope was beautiful, with my green eyes and Aiyana's dark hair and skin that was a perfect blend of both our heritages. Looking at her tiny face, I felt a fierce protectiveness that I had never experienced before. She's perfect, Aiyana whispered, cradling his daughter for the first time. She's going to face challenges we can't even imagine, I said, voicing my deepest fear. Yes, he agreed. But she's also going to have something we never had. Parents who love each other and who will teach her that her mixed heritage is a gift, not a burden. As Hope grew from infant to toddler, we watched her navigate the world with the fearless curiosity of childhood. She played with children of every background in the diverse neighborhood around the clinic, learning words in Chinese from Mrs. Chen, Spanish from the Mexican families, and Apache from her father. Look, Mama, she said one day when she was 3, pointing to her reflection in a shop window. I'm like a rainbow, lots of colors, all mixed up together. Yes, sweetheart, I said, kneeling down to her level. You are. And rainbows are the most beautiful things in the sky. It was then that I realized we had succeeded in something that had seemed impossible back in Mesa Verde. We had created a life where love was stronger than hatred, where our differences were celebrated rather than condemned, and where our daughter could grow up proud of who she was. Years later, when Hope was old enough to understand, we told her the story of how we met, how we fell in love despite the world's disapproval, and how we fought for the right to be together. Were you scared, Mama? She asked. Terrified, I admitted, but your father taught me that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's doing what's right despite the fear. And what did Mama teach me? Aiyana added, pulling both of us into his arms, is that love is always worth fighting for, no matter what the cost. As I write this now, 20 years after that first meeting in the schoolhouse in Mesa Verde, I can say with certainty that every sacrifice was worth it. Aiyana and I built a life together that was richer and more meaningful than anything I could have imagined in my sheltered youth. We raised a daughter who is proud of her heritage and confident in her place in the world. We contributed to a community that valued diversity and compassion over prejudice and fear. The world is still far from perfect. There are still those who would deny people the right to love across racial lines. Still communities where hatred flourishes in the darkness of ignorance. But there are also places like San Francisco, where different cultures blend and create something beautiful. Where love is recognized as the universal language that transcends all artificial boundaries. They mocked me for loving him. Those people in Mesa Verde, they called me a traitor to my race, a disgrace to womanhood, a corrupter of children. But they were wrong about everything that mattered. Love didn't diminish, MIT completed me. It didn't corrupt, MIT purified me. It didn't make me less than I was, it made me more than I ever dreamed I could be. And when danger came, when the mob gathered with their torches and their hatred, it was Aiyana, the man they called savage, who stood between me and harm. It was his courage, his dignity, his unwavering love that saved not just my life, but my soul. In the end, that's what love does. It saves us from the worst parts of ourselves and brings out the best. It builds bridges where others see only chasms. It creates hope where others see only despair. They mocked the white woman for loving him, but only the Apache warrior fought for her life. And in fighting for my life, he gave me a life worth living. A powerful story of how true love transcends all boundaries and prejudices. Like if you believe love knows no color, subscribe for more stories about courage, conquering hatred, and share to remind others that the heart sees what the eyes often miss. Legal notice: this story is completely fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. The characters, events, and situations described are products of imagination and do not represent real facts. Any resemblance to real people or events is purely coincidental.